Nice facilities here. So I'm honored to moderate the Financial Outlook panel, which has a very long tradition, I've learned, and seems to be also quite popular since we have that overflow as well. And we have a panel of 5 esteemed experts, and thank you very much for taking the time, especially at this time of the year where everybody is really busy. And I guess we have a lot of things to talk about, so our topic is really broad, and so especially with the incoming Trump administration, there are a lot of questions we can hopefully answer. So we have here Jean Rudolph, who is Senior Director of the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, which is a public-private partnership, kind of a think tank. He sits in the middle. We have Axel Merk. He is the President and Chief Investment Officer of Merk Investments in Palo Alto. Rouven, did I pronounce Rouven? Pronounce that right? Yeah. So he is a Senior Associate at the law practice of Osborne and Clarke in San Francisco, right? And Steffen Bartschat, who is actually American, I learned, so he came over when he was 11 years old to the United States, and he is an entrepreneur, advisor, and business angel at Sandhill Angels. And to my left, we have Gunther Hofmann, director at Armanino, right? The largest independent CPA firm in California. So I hope something down. So before we start our hopefully lively discussions, I want to give a short review of the next 90 minutes, and including questions at the end from the audience. And we will first talk about the obvious question that is on everybody's mind at the moment. So what to expect from the President-elect Donald Trump, who might be inaugurated in January. So if the electoral college plays along, I think there was already an electoral voter who said that he is not going to support Trump yesterday. So that's going to be very interesting how that plays out. So a lot of questions is that will we see a revival of the manufacturing base in the United States as Donald Trump has promised? What does it mean for Silicon Valley if it becomes much harder to secure working visas here? Will there be a shortage of labor in the agriculture industry in California? And then we are going to move onto the global stage. There are also a lot of topics to discuss. China, is there going to be a trade war with China? We see a rise of protectionism around the world. Next year we are going to have elections in Germany and the Netherlands, and so that usually means that there's no political decision making, so it's basically paralyzed. And then we are going to go back to the Bay Area and going to talk about the rising house and living costs, so what it means for Silicon Valley, if there's going to be an IPO boom. And finally, questions about the startup here in Silicon Valley, the trends. So what will be the next Uber, what will be the next Airbnb? So it used to be Google, now it's Uber or Airbnb. And are still a lot of US investors actually who are also putting money into German companies. I was just in Berlin in October and gave a presentation there, and there's a lot of money flowing also in Berlin as well, but only as seed financing capital. So the later rounds is still a problem over there. So perhaps we can talk a little bit about that. So before we start the discussion, I would like to ask the panel to do a short introduction of yourself. So what is your expertise and also your personal connection to the Bay Area? So Gunther, perhaps you start.
All right. My name is Gunther Hofmann. Like you said, I work at Armanino, which is like Armani, but Armanino. So we don't make suits, but we're a large accounting and consulting firm, about 1,000 employees. I'm not an accountant. I head up the corporate finance group, which is providing mergers acquisition advisory. Before that, I was with a small valuation boutique, so we did a lot of startup valuation. Startup company valuation, technology companies. Before that with a strategy firm, then with a startup, and then with a German automotive company, their venture fund. So we do a lot of venture investments. And connection with the Bay Area, so I'm here since 16 years. I have gone to a couple of cycles.
I'm Axel Merk, and yes, we run investment business, but unlike most investment businesses here, we focus on the public markets. We are probably best known for what we do in the currency and precious metal space, but we really look at ourselves as a global macro shop that's hugely interested in what's happening in the world. We had our office staff 24 hours when the Brexit vote came, and based on that we knew that nobody in this room has a clue what's happening in the world because people think differently, and so we were also humble going into the vote, in the election vote, so I have plenty of opinions that I'll be glad to share. But I've been here, my family has been here for 16 years, and we have 4 children and live in Palo Alto, and the office these days we have in San Francisco.
Well, good evening, I'm Sean Randolph. I'm with the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, and we're a kind of think tank. We're part of the Bay Area Council, which is the major business organization for Northern California, about 300 large employers. It does public policy work for its members. And my part of the organization is the research and the analytics arm. And so our basic job is to understand, if we can, what's driving the economy of California, what's driving the economy of the Bay Area, San Francisco, Silicon Valley. What are the issues? What's holding it back? If we can, to provide fact-based, credible, independent information and analysis, but also ideas about what strategies could we follow, whether you're in the public sector or the private sector, to help the economy go forward. So we are supported by the region cities, its mayors, as I mentioned, all these companies, and also by the major research universities and business schools. And we work in everything from infrastructure to venture capital to global business to higher education, you name it. If it's a significant issue long-term for the region or the state, we will have some facts, maybe even an opinion or two.
My name is Siegemund. I'm a German corporate lawyer with Osborne Clarke, an international law firm with 21 offices, I think, in the meantime around the world. My focus is on venture capital, financing, and M&A transactions. I'm usually based in Cologne in Germany, currently seconded for half a year to our Silicon Valley offices. Our Palo Alto office is around here for 15 years already, I think, and we don't advise in US law, but we help our clients that we have here in the Silicon Valley with any questions, expansion, etc., into Europe especially, but also the rest of the world. And my secondment almost is over, so I'm really still happy to be here, and at the end of the year I return, and my colleague over there is just taking over. Emily Jones, the new partner who runs the office for the next couple of years. Yeah, thank you.
Hi everybody, Steffen Bartschat. I was actually born in Germany, but moved when I was 13, so pretty much an American now. My first job was at IBM in the AI Technology Center back in 1989, so it's really interesting to see AI make a comeback. So I have a technical background, but for the last 5 years or so I've been working as a technology scout for the automotive industry, scouting for Forcia, the #1 supplier of vehicle interiors. And I have a long background in consumer technologies, software and hardware startups. And on the side, been involved for about 6 years with Sandhill Angels. It's about 112 members. This year we did about 4.6 million in investments, 48 deals total from a variety of different areas.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just realized that I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Matthias Hohensee. So I'm the Silicon Valley bureau chef of Wirtschaftswoche, which is basically the German business week. So I came here in '98 to establish our office. Was here for a year. I founded an internet startup in Germany, sold that, and then I immediately came back to California in 2001 and have been here ever since. And write a weekly column about Silicon Valley entrepreneurship. And my claim to fame is that I saw Google when they only had like 25 people back in '99 in Palo Alto, and I asked Larry Page what the business model is, and he said we don't have one. So I would never have thought that it would become such a big company. So thanks for being here today. So then let's just dive into Trump. So Trump is coming into office, so probability is very high in January. So nobody here in Silicon Valley actually foresaw this development, with the exception of Peter Thiel, a notable exception perhaps. And I think we have already heard a lot of nightmare scenarios about Trump. And what I've learned here in Silicon Valley is that you have to be optimistic. So you have that unbridled optimism. And so we Germans, we tend to be a little bit more on the pessimistic side. So John, could you give us your idea, what is the impact of Trump on Silicon Valley? And perhaps you can start with the positive things, or perhaps everything is positive. I don't know.
This is a really open-ended subject. I worked in a bunch of U.S. administrations and transition teams, and there's never been a time when there is more uncertainty about what's going to happen next, for all the obvious reasons. I think if you take Trump and compare him to any past president-elect, pretty much they've come in with an identifiable philosophy. So when Reagan came in, it was a conservative philosophy. You knew the principles, you knew what was going to guide him. He was very pragmatic in applying them. He wasn't an ideologue in fact, but there was a set of guiding principles. When you can name any other president, whether they're pragmatic or not, that you kind of knew the philosophy that informed them. In this case, it's not clear there is any philosophy. That he's clearly not a conservative in the sense that people in the conservative movement would identify with. He's certainly not a liberal. He appears to be a deal maker and a pragmatist without any particular philosophy other than making sure that to the extent he can, he addresses the issues that got him elected, that constituency is concerned with. But beyond that, I suspect what happens is going to be case by case. He may do something in one industry, one sector, one set of social issues, and something else in another without any clearly consistent direction where you could say, that's a unifying theme. But for Silicon Valley and California, the Bay Area, well, there's been speculation in the paper. Who knows whether San Francisco is standing up and universities are standing up and say we're going to be sanctuary campuses, we're going to be sanctuary cities. Well, is he going to withhold federal funding? Already the city of San Francisco is making contingency plans in its budget in the event that federal funds are withheld in some way, who knows? But they have to plan on that as a possibility. So you have that kind of ideological, political angle around immigration. I think on the immigration front, it's kind of hard to say what he would do around things like H-1Bs. We know, at least, that he's not going to embrace comprehensive immigration reform that would be addressed primarily at immigrants from Mexico and Latin America. That would be an issue here in California, especially if he wants to get them out. So many of our service workers are documented or undocumented workers from Mexico and Central America. So the odd thing about that is that during the campaign he said they're flooding America, when in fact they've been leaving America in recent years. There are many fewer coming in than in the past. And so we actually have labor shortages in the Central Valley. So immigration is a big topic. I think for us in the Bay Area in California, climate and clean energy is. We are so committed as a state and a region. California is leading the U.S. in climate policy, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. California and some other states may be on their own now, yet the federal government pulls back. And I think it will be up to them to hold the line and hold their policies with the withdrawal of federal support and maybe federal resources. Trade, a big impact for us. This is a larger topic, but if he in fact pulls back entirely from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, has a lot of implications for us because most of our trade is with Asia. There's a lot of support for that here. That has implication for what may or may not happen in the future with TTIP. And so I think the trade issues are big. China, right now it's kind of just poked them in the eye this week. Where does that lead? Who knows? But if there were to be a trade war with China, hopefully not. that has implications here too. So I think the big issues for us, aside from sanctuary cities, are climate, energy, immigration, and trade. That just starts the list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Trump and the Republicans are actually not the same, so there are differences between the GOP and what Trump is trying to do.
So we can talk about Trump, of course, for hours. I would, to just disagree with something, I actually think Trump does have a philosophy, a little bit anyway. First, everybody knows that when he gets insulted or offended, he doubles down. That can be considered philosophy, and that includes when it happens domestically, it's one thing. When it happens with China, then it could have bigger implications for trade in the Silicon Valley. But if somebody wants to get to know Trump's philosophy, I would encourage anybody to Google a 1987 interview he did with Larry King, where two topics came up in, at that time Twitter didn't exist, so those were much longer interviews. And the two topics that were dear to his heart was, and they're kind of related, one was trade. He thinks the U.S. getting a rotten deal, and the other one was on the U.S. military engagement abroad. He thought that the rest of the world doesn't pay its fair share. And so those are two topics that he's had throughout his career. Many of the other topics, I think it was The Atlantic that said, well, his critics, the media, take him literally but not seriously, whereas the supporters take him seriously but not literally. And I think one has to digest that, what that means. So when he says, for example, TPP is dead, and he claims that he has saved jobs that would have gone to Mexico otherwise, he loves those media events, but that doesn't mean there's going to be much policy behind it. There may or may not be, we don't know. Now, as far as policy is concerned, though, a couple of things I'd like to point out. One is, he is somebody who delegates. He couldn't be running all his things if he didn't delegate much. So whoever he appoints is very relevant. Also, independent of Congress does, the one place where you have a lot of power in the executive is in the agencies. And the one consistent theme in the folks that he has appointed, or at least nominated, is that he's going to cut back on regulation. So he's going to obviously give an election gift that he's going to build some sort of coal power plant, but the same might happen in the other agencies. And basically what that means, regulation for business is really just where the barrier to entry is. The more regulation you have, the higher the barrier to entry is. And so what that means basically is that small business is going to be better off, and big business is comparatively worse off, and with regard to Silicon Valley, especially with regard to potential threats with regard to trade. And I can go on and on also with tax policies and what so forth, but I'll just leave it at that for now.
So what about the promise of Trump to lower the tax rate, the corporate tax rate from 35% to 15%? Is that going to have a major impact here in Silicon Valley? Also the repatriation of money that is abroad. Apple thing has like, what is it, over $200 billion parked in Europe. So are we going to see basically a boom here in Silicon Valley because all those money is coming back and flowing in here? Who wants to take that question?
I'll jump in on anyway. So he's made it a major point that the corporate tax rate is too high, and probably anybody in the corporate world would agree with that. That's not a new topic. But he's talked about lowering it to 15%. So I think the OECD average is about 27%, and ours currently is 35%. So by any sense, I think ours is the third highest in the world after something like Cameroon and God knows what. So it's really extraordinarily high. And so this may be one of the upsides we can expect from Trump, that most businesses would say that that is way too high. It disincentivizes U.S. companies from investing here. And the cost of repatriating profits earned overseas at that tax rate is really prohibitive, especially if you're in California. If you combine that with the state tax rate, you have an effective rate of 40%, which is really crazy. So if they lower the rate, that goes to this broad theme that came up in the carrier thing this week about improving the climate for business in the States. And if the climate for business is better, companies may do less overseas, they may have more jobs here rather than moving manufacturing abroad. So I think we can expect movement on that. Is it 15%? Is it something else? It's going to drop a lot. And I think the other implication is, I think it's $2.3 trillion that's currently parked overseas at U.S. companies from profits earned abroad. There's a lot that can be done with that money. Some years ago we had a one-time tax holiday. was about 5%, to bring it back. It wasn't all put to good use, but I think the consideration now is if that comes back at a lower tax rate, and if it's incentivized along with certain kinds of tax credits in the right way, they want to focus that on reinvestment, especially in U.S. infrastructure. So that raises other issues, but I think to the extent that those trillions or some part of that comes back, it's going to be beneficial for us.
So is Trump overall actually positive for the economy of Silicon Valley, if I listen to you?
Well, it's hard to say what the balance is. I think he's positive probably on tax rates, positive for repatriation of profits, positive for infrastructure investment, one way or the other. Maybe, depending on how it turns out, negative on trade agreements and trade, maybe negative on immigration. So it's going to be a real mixed bag, I think.
Let me just chime in on the tax policy for a moment. As you may recall, tax policy was not one of the discussion topics in '87. I don't think he cares all that much about tax policy, and that can be seen by the fact that he delegated the tax proposal to Larry Kudlow, who many of you know from CNBC if you watch that. The entire tax proposal is, in my view, not well thought through. That said, there is a tax proposal that's also on the table, the House GOP tax proposal, the Paul Ryan proposal, which is very much thought through, and any tax proposal starts in the House. And so I'd encourage anybody to study that. And most of the headlines you've seen in media kind of compare the two and say they're very similar, but there are a couple of very key issues that very much affect trade and the economy. And basically it switches the US tax system to one that's kind of more in line with what the rest of the world has, that you're taxed based on where you get your revenue, just rather than having a worldwide taxation. One of the things that's very relevant for investments is that the House tax proposal says that you should be able to depreciate any investment 100% the first year. And if that indeed passes, that has major implications, especially for industrial investments. It wants to have a one-time tax on foreign earnings that are there, and then no taxes going forward. The other thing it does have, which is very controversial and may not get through, is that the House proposal says that any imports you cannot deduct from your taxes. And so any import cost you have zero deductions on that. And basically, they know they can't introduce a value-added tax, and they try to do that backwards. The WTA may not agree to that and so forth, but if that happens, you're really changing the structure of how the entire tax system works. And then just one thing on Trump specifically, the carrier thing, that shows what he's interested in. He has an interest in these media-friendly shows, but in my view, that may backfire in the sense that if you know that you're going to get in trouble for shutting down a plant, you might think twice about opening it up in the first place. So those sort of activist approaches will be media-friendly, but ultimately are not going to help the economy.
So one big promise of Trump was actually to bring back the manufacturing base in the United States. So he addressed Apple, for instance, that they should produce the iPhones here in the United States. Steffen, with the engineering background and working for companies like IBM, is that even possible? Is there the knowledge, is that available here in the United States, let alone the cost, or costly that would be?
Well, Jens and I were actually talking about that earlier, and you know, there's definitely a cost difference. And I ran a wearable startup a while back, and I think about a third of our cost was labor, because we picture all these high-tech robots putting things together, but you know, a lot of it is done by human hands. But in Apple's case, it's not just the labor costs, it's also just the expertise. And the expertise of putting together an iPhone and dealing with all the various things that can go wrong it can't be found anymore in the US. It's over in China now. Even in my little wearable startup that I was in, you know, we had a problem. And we had to go to Chicago, we had to get a new mold made. It took weeks, and I was told in China you'd make a phone call in about a half hour, 3 people would show up with 3 different fixes that we could try. So, you know, that's the difference, and I think that's why Apple is going to remain in China in manufacturing.
I'll just chime in on that. Be less vocal later. But Foxconn will be more than happy to set up a shop in the US and show Americans how to do it. So I think technically the technology, yes, there might be delays, that's possible, but a company like Apple has a huge political risk. If you're going to offend China, you're going to penalize Apple. I mean, that's the prime target. And on top of that, as we've heard in the introduction, Silicon Valley, these are the new bankers, right? These are the bad guys that kill all the jobs. And so if you work for a multinational high-tech company, you're going to be potentially in the crossfire of the policies because you're going to be sacrificed in order to save the blue-collar worker in the Midwest.
But just another thought on the manufacturing side, that if you go back to the campaign, the portrayal was that U.S. manufacturing has been crushed, all the jobs have gone overseas, and so the reality is that, in fact, U.S. manufacturing production is at an all-time high. It's never been higher. U.S. manufactured exports are at an all-time high. They've never been higher. And that includes just about all the countries we have free trade agreements with. So what hasn't grown is manufacturing employment. And that is primarily due to technology and efficiencies in the production process. It was kind of like agriculture. We produce so much more agriculture than we ever did in the past, when it was a large part of our employment base. So ag employment's gone way, way down to almost nothing. Production's way up. So manufacturing is a similar trend. So I think there's going to be this debate about manufacturing and bringing manufacturing jobs home. And in fact, well, we know the trade agreements are not the primary cause. It's technology, and how can we as a country actually address the social dislocations that come from big structural change like that. But in fact, manufacturing, some may come home, sure, it's more expensive to do business in China. Automation and robotics make it the labor advantage in China less important than it was. It's more feasible to do it here. I think some of that will happen, but it's a different question from saving American manufacturing, because it doesn't really need saving.
Well, I think also, like we saw with the carrier deal, it's done for the media. It's a one-off negotiation. It looks good on Twitter, and it's a cost of doing business for United Technologies. 10% of their revenue is with the Pentagon, so they keep the assembly plant there. But it's a one-off, so I don't necessarily see that as a overarching strategy, but more of as one-off negotiations.
And Silicon Valley actually was built on talent, so talent from abroad. And now it seems that a lot of companies don't know what's going to be the next immigration policy. And so Rouven, I know you can comment on clients, but is there already discussion among your clients what to do if they can't secure any working visas anymore, or what do they do?
This is going to be a short answer, but no, not really. At least I haven't heard anything about it yet. It's rather a discussion in the situation related to on Brexit, but I mean, it will end up probably in the same way. Of course, I mean, people have to think about it, and there's so many really talented people, especially around here. You have Stanford, you have Berkeley, whatever. But many of these students are not from the United States, and I mean, me as well. I'm here on a visa, I could imagine it's getting more complicated. So of course, people are beginning to think about it, but unless he's in office and the new laws are made, I think we all stare at this big, what do you call it, crystal ball, and nobody can really say.
You can keep the microphone. So you let's move to the global stage. You already mentioned Brexit. We have the crisis in Italy looming as well. You work for a British company, so you're basically between the shares, so to say. So what's the impact of Brexit actually on the economy in the upcoming year? And also the crisis in Italy, and then we have all the uncertainty about Trump. So what does it mean for the whole?
Right. So maybe let's start with Brexit. I think Brexit is the same type. We still don't know, unless we don't know what model the agreement between the remaining EU and the UK will have, we cannot really say what's the outcome. But certainly, if, for example, now you have a company from over here and they consider to go to Europe, they have to ask themselves the question already now, is it like always in the past the typical way to set up the headquarters in London? Because there you have a business culture that's close to yours, like here. The language is the same, and then you have access to the single market and the talented people. The latter ones will cease to apply once, well, pretty sure at least, once Brexit is effective. And to be honest, I think currently, I spoke to a lot of companies from over here and clients. Brexit is still too far away to have a real impact now, but I'm pretty sure it will have a deep impact or a remarkable impact, let's say in a year already, once that Article 50 has been triggered. We know more about the timelines, and then I think the Commission made it very clear that they will not start negotiations prior to the triggering of Article 50, but once that has been done, I'm pretty sure we also, we will follow the process and see what's then the outcome.
Do you think Brexit will happen, or is it?
I hope pretty much that it won't happen, but I think it's kind of unlikely once that the process is true. I mean, who knows? Theresa May, in 3 years, we see her standing there. Hey, look, dear British people, this is what we got out of it. Do you really want that? But I mean, it could also be the other way around. So I think it's going to happen. I think at the same time that the remaining EU will not make it an easy deal for the UK. Also to make an example for all the other countries who might only think of leaving the EU. But I mean, it's not only bad. I mean, it's also, there are some opportunities. I mean, for a company coming over now to Europe, it's not the decision between either the UK or the remaining EU and single market, because the UK is still the second biggest economy in Europe, and I'm pretty sure that you will want to have then one subsidiary in the UK for that market, and then one in the, well, remaining countries of those you consider they might definitely remain.
If I can just chime in on a couple of things. First of all, maybe to bring it home just for a moment, the US actually is not as dependent on trade as Europe is and many other places in the world. In fact, much of the stuff we import from Asia is produced by American companies abroad. So let's just keep that in mind. And so now specifically on Brexit, the Brits, they haven't solved any of the structural issues by choosing to go outside the European Union, and so they'll struggle. And most notably, the thing that's going to struggle the most is the inward investment. Why would you invest in the UK right now if you don't know what the rules are going to be? But as far as some local business is going to thrive, some Unilever, for example, doesn't sell some goods anymore in the supermarkets because they can't make any money, so domestic suppliers are going to come in. The financial services sector, which is hugely important, they are not going to change as dramatically as some people think, I don't think, because all the London-based banks are going to do is they're going to open satellite offices, they're going to hire 100, 200 people there, and then they're going to get the European passport from those offices, but most folks don't want to live in Frankfurt, most folks don't want to live in Dublin or in Paris, and so they want to live in London, and so that's going to continue to be that place. But we've already seen that there was a suburb in London where they had an election, and the Conservative candidate was kicked out, partly because of Brexit, partly because maybe of a third runway, or another runway, a fifth runway, I think, whatever it is, in Heathrow. But if you're not a radical party, it is very difficult for you to pursue this credibly, and so they might just lose some things. And then just one word on Italy. Keep in mind, had that referendum been passed, the odds of the Five-Star Movement coming to power and actually doing something would have been far higher. And so now what we have with Italy is what we've always had with Italy. We had a mess, right? I mean, the same with all of Europe. It's a mess. And it's going to continue in that process. And Italy has a way of moving forward with that. And we can talk about it for hours. The question is, what does it mean for the US? And I'll just leave that in the room without trying to answer that question.
One thing on manufacturing, or rather on Brexit, I agree for the most part to think that if you're a US company, let's say you're Wells Fargo and you're running your European operations out of London, You will have to think about the efficiency of doing that in the future. So I suspect most of them will not leave London, but they will shift a substantial amount of activity somewhere on the continent. So right now, places pretty much in order like Paris, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, and Dublin are already contending. They're kind of advertising. The president of Ireland here was here last week. Now this is a topic. He's not trying to take the business away, but they're all kind of lining up. So I think we'll see some migration out to those cities. London's role as the central place in Europe for this kind of financial activity may decline. The other two impacts, though, would be, I think, around talent and startups. My son works for a startup in London. It's not that small. They hire a lot of people, but he's saying that they're already having some more difficulty hiring talent from the continent who says, well, maybe we don't want to go to London. Maybe we're not going to be there long. We're not going to be that welcome. And so that's one factor. And then the other is if you're a startup, say in London or anywhere in the UK, one of the reasons they're there is it's the place where you find the most venture capital in Europe. The trick is that there's still not that much, and the London VCs, like VCs everywhere across Europe, get a whole lot of money from the EU. And so if they're no longer going to get that money from the EU, but VCs on the continent get it, it at least raises some questions about whether London will stay as vibrant a startup hub as it has been. Maybe they will, but it's going to raise some issues.
You have a different opinion, Axel?
Well, it wasn't my opinion. It was a CEO of an American bank who told me personally about what he's going to do and what his competitors are going to do. And I was far more pessimistic before I spoke to him. And obviously they might change their mind. But the attitude that appears to be in London right now is that they will do this by, all right, Bank of America has a Dublin presence. So yes, they'll hire more people there. And yes, maybe the top management is going to spend 2 days a week there or so. But people don't trust Europe. They don't trust that no transaction tax will be introduced. They don't trust the taxation in France. They don't like the weather in Dublin. Frankfurt is boring. So they have the feeling that the talent will continue to be there. Clearly that will change over time. But right now, the attitude from the bosses at these American banks there is that they will keep most of the presence there.
Yeah.
I wanted to disagree with Axel too. I lived in Paris, it's not that bad. So I think Brexit is a problem for Britain, first and foremost. But then on the other side, it's also not so bad. So I talked with one of our colleagues in Hong Kong, and they just closed a deal with a UK hotel group. So this is a buying opportunity for a lot of foreign companies where the exchange rate is favorable and they buy assets because at some point it's going to go up again. So it's there's a silver lining. So I think Switzerland is doing reasonably well and they're not in the EU, so might not be as bad.
And I have to get back to Trump, so sorry.
Why?
The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, so a lot of emotions in that, especially in Germany. Is that dead in the water? Is there any chance that will ever be passed, or what could be in replacement, or will nothing change? So Rouven, you want to take?
Well, I'm a member of the German-Canadian Business Association and lived in Canada for some time, and I'm really happy that CETA finally passed. And I think TTIP is just a media and politically blown up thing, because such contracts exist with almost all countries in the world, and nobody's talking about it. And here you have these chicken, that are raised with a certain Kronchen, I don't know what it is. And I just think that already, there's so much emotion in it, but it's so few based on facts, that's already a big problem. I think TTIP already was much more difficult to realize than CETA ever was, and I was skeptical about it. To be honest, now I'm more than skeptical that it will have a chance to be entered into. But I mean, there might be any other type of contract, of course, but at least what we've heard of the president-elect so far, I'm not really optimistic.
So it's not a bad thing, Axel?
Axel?
Well, I think the most relevant one for the U.S. economy is probably NAFTA, because that's an agreement that is in place. There are provisions on how to rework it, and this is one of the things where once you look at the details, you see how difficult it is to open a can of worms. If you really wanted to renegotiate it, you had lobbyists from so many directions that you cannot possibly do something. And so my guess is, again, he's going to do things that are media friendly. And maybe he's unilaterally going to do certain things, and then he can bully a Mexico. He's not going to be able to bully a China. And so that's one of the reasons why the Mexican peso has been so weak, because Mexico, one of the things that Mexico has been advertising is, hey, if you have your plant in Mexico, there's no tariff to deliver to the US. And so the rhetorics, that's going to be harmful to Mexico and so forth. Ultimately, Trump isn't interested in renegotiating anything. He's interested in media-friendly opportunities. And so, and maybe he's going to argue with the Chinese for 2 weeks and then say we're best buddies. Right? The more likely scenario is going to happen exactly. He's going to talk to Taiwan, the Chinese are going to rebuke him, and then he's going to double down. And then at some point somebody's going to cross a red line and things escalate. And so that's the sort of thing that may happen. And also, foreign policy is not the most important thing on his agenda. You notice that how long it takes to find somebody in that field. He had somebody very quickly from many of the other agencies. He doesn't know foreign policy enough, which also means he's going to make mistakes. And given his style, he's going to offend some people. Now, the one good thing is that this might be good if you want to invest in military, right? I mean, those sort of things. And historically, that's an area. Well, I mean, just on a broader note, everybody's talking about fiscal stimulus, and we haven't talked about that so much. Well, how do you get fiscal stimulus done when your parliament doesn't get along? You have some budget hawks in Congress. I mean, they're all Republicans, but they might be hawkish. Well, you have a common enemy, right? I mean, that's so you ramp up military spending. I mean, you have the South China Sea that's less stable. How do you defend yourself? You build up military. That's finally how the Japanese can get their military spending up, and they get their fiscal stimulus that they're all looking for. So that's the sort of direction I think we should be more looking at. I'm not suggesting World War III is going to break up tomorrow, but globally, with the rise of populist politicians, policies, countries are less stable. And in the US, we have robust institutions, and so we can deal with somebody like Trump. The Middle East has revolutions, and other countries might be less lucky, and so that's the sort of thing I think in the medium to long term that we have to watch out for. Where's the political stability? And Silicon Valley used to be quite heavily on the defense sector, but that's probably an area that's going to do well under Trump.
Oh, back on TTIP, one thought. Don't be surprised if somewhere down the road there's a proposed free trade agreement with the UK. Trump has said, oh, I'm not sure if I like multilateral agreements, but I do like maybe bilateral. I'm not sure why that is, what the difference is. But you've got to think, well, what bilateral agreement could be out there that he would like? Oh, the UK. So I would bet it's just a matter of time, and it's really more of timing on the UK's part when they could actually make this move, that idea gets dropped on the table.
I absolutely agree, 100%, and I'm sure that maybe in the negotiations later on Brexit, this will play a role, because then I have more power.
I have to get back to you, Axel, so I think it's really interesting. How have you adjusted your investment portfolio?
All right, with the caveat that none of this is investment advice. Well, let me, again, can talk about this for hours, but let me just go back to an earlier theme. And obviously the markets have moved quite dramatically since the election and so forth. We have a webinar on Thursday if you want to join that. No. But I said that one of the things Trump is going to do that's reasonably certain is reduce regulation. Now, that doesnn't mean regulation is going to be out of the window, so usually you always vote for change and then you don't really get it. But you've already seen that, for example, the NASDAQ has dramatically underperformed the Russell 2000, and just linking a little bit to Silicon Valley. And the key difference is the NASDAQ has the larger multinational technology companies, whereas the Russell 2000 has the smaller companies that tend to be more domestically focused. So I think that is one of the key things. I mean, we can talk about others. The other thing that has changed is obviously the bond market has plunged quite substantially. And my view is that the 30-year bull market in bonds may well be over. And there are two reasons why bonds may go down. Either because real growth might pick up, or because inflation might pick up. Right now, the market's interpretation, that's not mine, but the market's interpretation is that real growth will go up. And part of that is precisely because if you have less regulation, well, you can make a longer term investment decision. And that right now the glass is half full and people think things are going to go well. Now that said, if you do have infrastructure spending, when you already have the unemployment rate be that low, the main thing you're going to get out of it is more inflation. You don't have as many shovel-ready projects, and so inflation is going to kick in. Also, if you introduce trade barriers, there is something to just, if you have a serious trade war, and everybody talks about the Mexican peso getting weaker. Well, if you look at the UK, the sterling plunged then after Brexit. And my view is, and that's just my view, is that when you introduce trade barriers, if you have a current account deficit like the UK and like the US, your currency tends to suffer. Now, it will tend to suffer then versus the euro. The euro, so the euro, in my view, if you have a trade war with the rest of the world, the euro, in my view, could potentially get much, much stronger. Now, we can talk about the euro in different contexts, but that is something that I think people are not quite understanding right now. They think that if you have trade barriers, that the US dollar is going to soar. I very much doubt that it's going to happen versus emerging markets, but not versus the European currencies.
So since I'm being paid in euro and I was watching it the other day and realized that I'm earning less and less, so what about the dollar-euro parity? I mean, is that coming? That has been predicted for over a year for Deutsche Bank, I think for spring this year. Is that, what's your take on that? Axel, you want to take it again? Sorry.
Well, I often have a reputation of being a Euro bull, and I'm not always a Euro bull, but let me just give you some food for thought here. The euro is behaving ever more like the yen. The yen used to be the currency that soared when there's a flight to safety, a flight to quality. And what has happened with interest rates being so much lower in Europe, amongst others, is the euro has become a so-called funding currency. Meaning when you borrow money in euros. And when the market is happy, when stocks go up, when quote-unquote risk is on in professional lingo, the euro tends to weaken, and that drives up stocks. So when the market tumbles, and the market can tumble when there's more uncertainty, when bonds fall too much, I think there's plenty of opportunity for assets to go down, well, you reduce your levered positions, and then you get a short squeeze, then the euro comes up. And so, and if you've seen in recent weeks, when the markets have tumbled, the euro has often gone up, the yen hasn't soared as much anymore. So the Europe in general, the Eurozone is becoming much more like Japan, and as such the euro, as much as we think that the Eurozone isn't doing enough, it is very, very difficult to weaken the euro. And the other thing I like to point out is everybody talks, oh, interest rates go up in the US and they are negative in Europe. Well, we've raised 25 basis points once. We're going to raise almost certainly again in a week from now. That if you raise interest rates by 0.25% a year, odds are you're falling further behind inflation. Inflation is going to pick up, and the Federal Reserve is falling further behind the curve, meaning that real interest rates, net of inflation interest rates, are actually coming down in the US. And in Europe, it is so much more difficult to induce inflation. And most people agree that many of these policies don't work, which also means it's very difficult to push interest rates lower. So clearly it depends on Thursday, Draghi is going to speak again, and every couple of weeks he comes up with a new theme of what should be important. But it is this interest rate differential people have been talking about is probably much less so. And also keep in mind that the dollar is more than 2 standard deviations above its long-term moving average versus so many currencies. So a lot of good news is priced in there. So yes, maybe one of these days there's going to be parity, but I wouldn't bet my house on that.
Okay, since time is really running out and flying, let's go back to our beloved Bay Area here. So housing is getting more and more expensive. Facebook is actually trying to build a dorm in Menlo Park for their employees. There are a lot of infrastructure problems. Everybody knows about the traffic jam coming here to San Francisco. That's horrible. So is that a problem for Silicon Valley? Our companies are already relocating, or I talked to a professor from Stanford Business School the other days, and he said, well, it's actually not a problem because there's the East Bay, there's a lot of land everywhere, so it shouldn't be a problem. But apparently it is. So John, as an insider here in the Bay Area, and could you give us your take?
Yes. So I think if you talk to most businesses here and ask what's their biggest problem from a public policy standpoint, most of them would tell you today housing. primarily because it impacts the ability of companies here to attract and retain people. Which means if you don't really have to be here for your industry or your particular company, and you can be somewhere else, perhaps you go somewhere else. So I think you see that kind of effect reflected in the fact that, say, if you go to, say, talk to people at UC San Francisco that are recruiting constantly young faculty. So this is one of the top 3 or 4 medical campuses in the US, and I hear stories from their senior people that it is hard to get these really talented young people to come because they come and they look around and they think, oh my gosh, the cost of housing, so they'll go to someplace else. So if you generalize that across the region, and multiply the scale, you can see a potential really big downside if we don't attract people of the quality and the quantity we have until now. So that's the concern. On the other hand, I got to tell the truth, I've been doing this job for about more than 15 years. I wrote the same thing 15 years ago. And UC San Francisco was saying exactly the same thing. And I'm continually amazed how we actually have not fallen back. We actually have not gone in the tank. And you think somewhere this has got to hit the wall, but so far it hasn't hit the wall. So I think the answer to that is, as far as I can tell, that the Bay Area brand is so unique. There's nothing like it in the world. There are other places that are really cool. There are tech centers, there are important things are happening, but there's nothing like Silicon Valley in the Bay Area. And we're seeing the population growing. Actually, whatever else is going on in housing, the population of the Bay Area is growing, both through natural population growth, but by imports, by people moving in. So 25,000 people moved into the city of San Francisco last year, and they tend to be really well educated. 70% had bachelor's degrees or above. And so right now, the tide is still coming in. There's no evidence that it's going to slow or that it's not going to come in for the foreseeable future. What we are losing probably is, let's say you got a company, you put your high value stuff here, it's really expensive, you put your back off to do other stuff you can do more cheaply outside California, outside the Bay Area. But I think somebody said, maybe you said, that well, California is pretty diverse. You don't have to go all that far. It's cheaper in the Central Valley than San Francisco, it's cheaper in the East Bay. So, we look at this as the Northern California mega region. And you may want to do some things in the city of San Francisco, other in Silicon Valley. Other you might put out towards Sacramento, why not? So there are diverse options, but right now the tide I think is still coming in terms of both people and companies, especially around technology.
So the dangerous thing about a bubble is that you don't realize it when you are in a bubble. I mean, the housing prices, isn't it just crazy? Can it go up again, or is it, are we in a bubble and we don't realize it, and next year it could be different? So who wants to take that?
I'd say it's cooling off now, actually. Who knows how long it will cool off, but actually the rate of the rise is moderating considerably, which is actually pretty good news. So our housing costs are more or less on a par with Manhattan. And that's been the case for like 15 or 20 years. That hasn't changed a lot. But it is the highest in the US along with Manhattan. And so right now it's supported by the market. But the trick of all that is that the reason the cost is so high, aside from people and companies coming in large numbers, it's just the fundamental failure of the region to build enough housing. It's really simple supply and demand. We've failed through every single year for the last 25 years to build enough housing in every price range, but especially the lower or middle income price ranges. And so we have this accumulated deficit of housing of all kinds that has grown year by year. And even with all the construction you see in San Francisco, we're actually still falling behind. Because even all that new construction, as much as we need it and like it, isn't keeping up with the inflow. So I think a lot of us would say, you want to solve this thing, you just need to build a lot of housing and build it as fast as you can, which runs into local opposition because people don't want congestion and more cars and they don't want their neighborhoods to change, but that's probably the only way to resolve it in the end.
Let me just give two anecdotal pieces of evidence. I live in Crescent Park in Palo Alto, a fairly expensive neighborhood. I have not seen as many houses for sale in many, many years. This time of the year, you usually don't sell houses. And so that's just a symptom that maybe the market is softening. And the other symptom that the market may be softening is when We know some local real estate developers in San Francisco, and they confirm that this has turned into a buyer's market. Now, if you look at certain statistics, things are fine, but yes, we will be at a tipping point. Now, we've predicted that many, many times. Who knows what's going to happen? But I think that social media, if there is a bubble, what social media companies did is they bought had long-term contracts for huge office space, and then they sublease, and there's even an index for that. And I think we've kind of, from that point of view, there are lots of signs that we are much closer to the top, if not beyond the top. And that's just my 2 thoughts.
I agree.
Yeah, it's after the top, but what's interesting is it's not a burst. Is that the bubble didn't burst. And I think that's the same with, I think last year we talked a lot about unicorns. There were 180 unicorns, now we're down to 120 about. What's surprising is not that it's less unicorns, but it's not really a bubble that had burst, but it's rather deflating. And it seems that's the same happening with housing.
Well, there's actually the theory that we have that boom and bust cycles here in Silicon Valley every 7 years. So counting from the financial crisis in 2008, so it should have started in 2015. So if that's true, so is a bust, is that overdue, Steffen? So
I don't think so. I don't see any signs of a bust at all. You know, I see tons of international startups moving in here. We've kind of become the Hollywood acting school, you know, of the Silicon Valley. So if you want to learn how to do a startup, you come here. And I think that drives up just you know, a ton of demand for housing, et cetera, et cetera. I worry about it a little bit. I was visiting Berlin this summer to meet with the startup scene there, and you know, there's tons of old, decrepit DDR era buildings there that startups are moving in. The cost of living is cheap. A lot of the Eastern Europeans are basing their startups there, and there's an ecosystem now with founders giving advice. So it's a functioning system, this kind of worries me that maybe the startups here can no longer be as efficient, right? But I don't really see a crash being imminent. The 7-year thing sounds very artificial. I was here for the 2000 bust. Back then that was very different. We really just attracted people from the US to come to the West Coast. This time around it's like a whole worldwide phenomenon.
Just add one more thought here, two actually. One is that economists always tell us that expansions don't die of old age. Now, I don't necessarily believe that. I think there are lots of things happening, but just keep that in mind. The other thing, just want to make a general comment. When one of the feelings many people have is, not in Silicon Valley, but in the US economy as a whole, that this economy hasn't really grown so much, we haven't seen the benefits. And just one comment I want to make is that when the economy chucks along at 3% or so, or 3.5%, 4%, you hire full-time staff. But when you grow only at 1.5% of net inflation, less than that, maybe even that, you're only going to hire temporary workers. And so this entire US economy, since it's been doing that for so many years, has learned to just ramp up temporary employees and never turn them into full-time employees. And so as long as we only have this low growth, even though we have positive, because when you only grow at 1.5%, you're so close to a recession, and that makes all the difference, and then you have to fire everybody again. And it's one of the reasons why the temp jobs have increased, but they've never converted them to full-time jobs. And that doesn't mean we have to tip over into a recession. I happen to think that we're a little long in the tooth, but still, economists tell you things can continue, and this is one of the reasons why it feels like people don't have full-time jobs.
I might add to that a bit. Maybe to Steffen's point about the startup scene, that there are a lot of other startup capitals or major cities around the world and around the country where this is happening in a significant way, but there's still nothing to compare to the brand of Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. So just thinking about the number of accelerators, you can think they're good or bad, but that are forming up, it's hard to keep up. So the Belgians opened up here last year. You can look around. The number of facilities that are hosting startups from overseas is growing very rapidly. It was just in the paper, I think, this week that Uber acquired a relatively young company that does AI, and they're moving the team here from the East Coast. They're going to call it Uber Labs, and they're going to be focusing on improving the services for Uber as they exist now, but also focusing on autonomous vehicles. And just about every major automotive company in the world is here now. They're not manufacturing stuff, they're looking at the future of the automobile around AI. So I think if it has to do with innovation, this area is going to continue to draw people in and draw companies in, I think, for a long time to come.
Just one comment. I think you're right, and I think the main driver for it is the huge amount of money that's here simply. And if you're a successful group of startups and you have the choice between anywhere in the world or here, I mean, you go here, of course, and if you find an investor who invests in your company, even in Germany or Belgium or wherever, you follow the money. That's, I think, and the investors have the power to say, come on guys, we do everything with our companies, that's our setup, so if you want to get our money, you have to flip over, and that's just the way it is. And of course, yeah, it's a brand, but in my view, it's the money also.
Yeah, I think there's actually either five to six times as much venture capital here as there is in all of Europe put together. So Berlin, London, it's growing, but it's still just a very small fraction of what is available here. So I agree. Who's got the money?
Yeah, I think we're long overdue for a recession or for a retraction here in Silicon Valley. So I think this quarter or last quarter investment was 10 billion. That's down from 14, 15 per quarter. It was invested 12 to 15 billion. That's venture capital investment. So that's already pulling back. We see that we do a lot of private company valuations, and a lot of our clients, they push out their next round. Or the next round is an inside round because they couldn't attract outside investors, new investors. So it is already cooling off. I think the question is it crashing, or is it going to be just a dip, and then we're going to have a lot of infrastructure investment from Trump, and it's going to go up again?
Yeah, talking about the unicorns, I mean, last year I had an interview with George Roberts from KKR, and I asked him about one of the largest money management companies in the world. So he has been here in Silicon Valley for 30 years, and I asked him about Uber and Airbnb. And he told me that he actually had the possible opportunity to invest in Uber and Airbnb, and I think at a valuation of $20 billion in the case of Uber. And he didn't do it, because he said, well, he has been here in Silicon Valley for 30 years, and he thinks it's a really good company, it's a good brand, people love it, but he doesn't see a way where he will ever get his money back, his investment. And so maybe he told me that because he didn't invest, so I don't know, but what is the exit for these unicorns, since Uber is already 86 billion or $68 billion worth, so that's also rumors in the market. Is there going to be an IPO boom, which has long been predicted, or what is the end game here?
I agree with Gunther that in the last year we saw a decline of VC investments, and also especially in unicorns. There are far fewer new unicorns in the last year than created before. So I think not that any bubble is bursting, but the air is going out slowly, and the valuations are becoming more realistic maybe. Which again, if you have your unicorn and you want to invest in the unicorn, maybe prevents you from doing it, because if you get in for such a high valuation, as you say, you don't get maybe your money back. And this is, in my view, also one of the reasons why we don't see that many exits. The money is in the market. So I read an article that buyers in M&A acquisition did several multi-billion acquisitions in the past 2 quarters. But so the money's there, but they didn't invest it into the unicorns. So I think I don't think we will, or we are just ahead of an IPO boom. I don't think.
Steffen,
I think I agree with all of that. I would just say that it's not necessarily a bad thing. That if you think about the dot-com movement bust, oh boy, the money's pouring in here. was way above what we have now. It didn't slow, and then it just dropped off a cliff, and there was obviously a lot of crazy stuff happening. But if in fact we can avoid a bust and have a gradual cooling and deflation, that's probably a very healthy thing.
Absolutely. So Steffen, you have already you have skin in the game. So your business, have you invested in a unicorn?
Little skin in the game, but you know, in the Sandal Angel sides, our investments have only gone up. And I think if you look at angels as a whole, as a category, you see a large increase. I think angels are picking up the slack a little bit. And I think in the Series A and B rounds, maybe the traditional venture guys are pulling back a little bit, but I see a lot of money coming in, a lot of capital from China and Chinese investors. And that worries me a little bit. You know, if Trump starts pissing off the Chinese and they put in capital controls or they tighten them even further, that could turn off an important spigot here in the valley. If you know, the super AAA rated startups, they still get venture money from all the well-known VCs that we see around here. But there's a category that's pretty good startups, not AAA quality. A lot of Chinese capital is going in on those, so that worries me a little bit. One other point on the Uber, investments. I think it's not necessarily that you buy in at $20 billion valuation. It's always those special that they never talk about. It's the special liquidation preferences, all those special deals you get that end up where you end up making even if they go IPO, you end up getting some extra shares, and you end up actually not buying in at that valuation. But everybody can say it's a huge valuation.
Yeah, sorry, just got quick. Sorry. Twilio, for example, was a super exit this year, right? But the companies you mentioned, there are several of them, those who had an exit, but it was a down round exit, which is absolutely fine for the late stage investors because they have the liquidation preferences. But the founders, I don't know, they made a very bad deal. And why is selling the company then?
Two comments. One is China doesn't need Trump to introduce capital controls. They have been doing that without Trump. The Financial Times writes today that European companies have difficulty taking their cash back out because of the latest round of outbound capital controls China has introduced. So expect more of that, and that's obviously not good news for China or the rest of the world. With regard to IPOs, the one comment I'd like to make is that one comment is that IPOs historically are great for job creation. Once a company gets money in IPO, historically, they have done that to dramatically increase the payroll, the staff that they have. And so from that point of view, IPOs are healthy. One of the key reasons IPOs haven't happened is that regulations have been much, much tighter, and there's no fun in being public. There's plenty of capital available on the private side, so why would you? We have in our industry, I deal with plenty of regulations of public companies and then some, and there's no fun in being public. And so why would you do it unless you have to, especially if the money is available? And so it's kind of cool to talk about an IPO market, but it's good for the local economy because they'll hire more people. But from a business point of view, why would you do it if you don't need to?
It's more pain than it's worth. The other piece is there's much more investor activism. So investors that take a share in your company and then tell you what to do. And we saw it with Mentor Graphics that then was sold to Siemens, where you had somebody taking a position and pushing them to an exit. So there's risks of being public, and if you can raise 200 million at a $1 billion valuation, why not do that rather than going to the public market?
But if the private investors don't do that anymore and you have to go to the public market, do you see that, or that private investors are not investing so much?
I'll give you a general answer. Obviously, historically you've had IPOs when the markets move up. When your markets are high, you have an exit, right? But one of the things about this low interest rate policy we've had globally is that there's so much money sloshing around, and you don't know what to do with it, so you chase ideas, and including in venture capital, and some of them might be good, some of them might be bad. Now the time when this isn't available anymore is let interest rates go up, let bond markets fall, let asset prices plunge, not even using the word crash, and suddenly you have a more hostile environment. that's the sort of environment where you would love to go to the IPO market, because suddenly all the private capital isn't around anymore. And so that's why I disagree with this notion that we can deflate quietly something. There's always a crash. It is just very difficult to hit the brakes gently and engineer a soft landing. Be that for the Federal Reserve in general or for Silicon Valley. I mean, Silicon Valley is not known for soft landings.
Let's talk a little bit about tech trends. So in summer I did a story about the US election. So the question was, what is the probability that Trump would get elected? And that was right after the Brexit. So I was unsure, and I actually asked Siri. So I used artificial intelligence. So I asked Siri, what is the probability of Trump becoming president? And the answer was anything can happen. Spot on. And so that really earned a lot of respect for artificial intelligence for me. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit brainwashed, so I have been attending Singularity University down in Mountain View for the last 3 days, and so I've learned about all the good things that are going to happen, and artificial intelligence, and human-like robots, and medicine which can cure everything. Steffen, so you are an expert actually in artificial intelligence, so what is hype, what is reality? Is that I think artificial intelligence was promised like 20 years ago. It would be that really big thing that didn't work out. So is it now different? Is it this time different?
All right, so this is where it helps to be German. You know, we're all skeptisch as Germans. And you know, I look at it, when I joined the AI Technology Center at IBM, 1989, I think we just emerged from the first winter of AI, because AI was hyped, I think, back in the 60s as a technology. We weren't able to make a go of it during the 80s. We tried, we built some expert systems. Neural networks had just come out at that time. But, you know, two big factors are happening right now. We've got basically the emergence of powerful GPUs. NVIDIA is a graphics card manufacturer that sped up your computer games. Well, guess what? They discovered AI, because it turns out GPUs are perfect to run neural networks, all that parallel processing. So that's one big factor. And then the other one is the whole cloud side, which gives super cheap devices. I would say your iPhone, but maybe that's not cheap enough. Maybe like the Amazon Echo, right? It's basically just a speaker that's connected to the internet, but it gives those devices intelligence, because it actually accesses the AI in the cloud. But you know, in general, don't believe anything the press tells you about a robot replacing you next year, or driving you to Las Vegas overnight or something like that anytime soon. You know, in engineering, you always have the Pareto rule. As a VP of engineering, I've found it, you know, it's very easy to make the first 80% of progress. That takes 20% of the time. And then the other 20% takes 80% of the time. And if you look at, you know, at some of these experiments you've seen, like Siri, you basically see that, right? We were all magically, everyone remembers the first time they talked to Siri or to Alexa, and you were just amazed at how cool it was. And then 2 days later, you found very rapidly the limits of that technology. And that's, you know, the engineers had gotten it maybe to 40%. I mean, it's not even close to 80%. So we still have a long road to go.
Anybody invested in an artificial intelligence startup on the panel? No? Would you, or? Yeah.
I can only say that in our business, we do invest a lot in number crunching. And we, anything from big data, from, I think it's called financial engineering in our field, but as much as I talk about currencies, I actually focused on artificial intelligence when I got my computer science degree. So that was a while ago in the previous wave, but that big data AI is everywhere, and that's how Trump won his election as well, by identifying where these pockets are. Nowadays you can do psychoanalysis of when you fill in your questionnaire on Facebook, whether you know this or that. I mean, all of this is used to sell things to you. So I think, yes, we may not see the self-driving car tomorrow take us to Vegas, but the current wave has made dramatic progress over the previous wave, and there's real use in what we have right now. And some of the applications we'll see, some we will not. But there is, I think we've only scratched the surface of what's coming. And yeah, I don't know whether we have the next IPO there tomorrow, but I see it in our business. It's hugely in use, which isn't the areas probably you guys were looking for, but I do see it in other places as well.
Yeah, I think at this point AI and big data is getting more vertical and it's getting more specific in the applications. So it's not general anymore, it's not theory. We have a client and they use AI to do telecom network optimization. So it's very specific applications, very technical, but it's something that has a clear benefit to the customer.
I think here in the Bay Area, one thing to look for, not right away, but not that far away, are the medical applications. You know, people think about the Bay Area as a tech center, but it's also the nation's leading biotech center. And there's a lot of effort going in now into applying machine learning to medical diagnosis and therapeutics, which could potentially have really large-scale impacts to the extent that you can really draw on huge data sets now for your analysis. So I think that's one of those big things we can look for on the horizon. There'll be a lot of activity in the Bay Area.
So we talked about artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, tech, etc., which are all one of these buzzwords, right? So everybody's thinking about it. And I think we shouldn't focus on these like super future applications, but there are companies and ideas around this. And I think if I had to invest any money now, I'd rather go to cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is touching all of these areas. And for example, you have not the self-driving car, we have the connected car, and which with each application that is added to a device like this, for example, everybody has his phone. In the morning, you chip it into your car. In the meantime, your phone is not only your phone anymore, but it's also regulating everything at home and the connected house, etc. And then maybe you have already only a rented car. So there's so much more possibilities for criminals to get access to all the information you have, not only in the car or on your phone, but in your whole life. That I think this is one of the areas which is growing faster and faster, and where the use cases here today already are not, like in 20 years or so.
But isn't it true that there's a lot of competition in cybersecurity as well? So if you look at cybersecurity stocks, I think they haven't done well over the last year because there's basically too much competition, because everybody is going into that. It's so obvious.
No, it's right. There's of course a big amount of competition, and you have to choose your investment. So I haven't invested yet, but I probably will not. But that's something which is, in my view, much closer to reality at the moment than the rest.
Yeah. Steffen, what's your take?
Well, I'm itching to share with you my idea for the huge trend down the road. It's not going to be a surprise or anything, but the AI gold rush reminds me of the gold rush we had here back in 1848, 1849. And guess what? The people that got rich, most of them weren't the miners. They were everybody who was supplying the miners. And in my view, that's really data. The neural networks require huge amounts of data to be able to do their job, and continuous supply of data. If you stop supplying the data, they get old very quickly. So any executive in large companies, this is a trend that actually favors large companies. They tend to generate tons of data. Startups, they don't have any data. They have no customers. There's no data to generate. So you really want to start thinking about who is best positioned to generate tons of data. The neural networks you can just download them off the internet. You just find a neural network and start training it. Hire yourself a knowledge engineer. So for me, that's really I think the really interesting trend that's coming down the pike. Data is, as they say, data is the new oil. It's really going to make everything happen.
Oh, we are on time, Caroline?
Let me just chime in on
Q&A.
Yeah, one comment just on this. I agree with this. Warren Buffett, if you look at what he invests in, it's not the oil production, it's the transportation. And so the oil producers are the bad guys, but if you deliver the energy, you're the good guy. And so that's, and many of the investments he's made are exactly in that, servicing those sort of industries.
Of course, let's be clear, the number one growth industry in California is going to be cannabis. So. Talking about gold rush.
Actually, there's some stories about cannabis industry. There's an incubator in Oakland, and there's actually an Apple engineer who worked on OS 10 under Steve Jobs, who is now doing like a pipe, cannabis pipe, and is also offering it in Germany as well, which is quite interesting. So let's open it up for discussion. Are there any questions from the audience? Come on, over there.
My name is Andre Pane. I'm actually a guest from Bonn. On this whole globalization thing and getting jobs back, another question in that term would be, what about digitization and the jobs that may be lost here just by new technology, or robots, or self-driving cars don't need drivers, and all these things. So how is that going